It's one thing to be a female prisoner, but a whole different thing to be so dangerous and serving a scary sentence that can either be multiple life sentences or even death penalty. Today, we took time to dig out the stories of the 10 most dangerous women in U.S. prisons, and we are here to break down everything in this documentary. Before we start, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss a notification about other crime stories. Let's begin. 1. Patricia Krenwinkel. Long before her name was got into history books as one of the most notorious female criminals in America, Patricia Krenwinkel was just a quiet girl from Los Angeles. Born on December 3, 1947, to a devout Catholic family, Patty, as her friends called her, grew up in a middle-class neighborhood, attending Catholic schools, singing in the choir, and living a life that looked, at least from the outside, like the picture of normalcy. But inside, she battled feelings of isolation and low self-worth. She was painfully shy, struggled with body image, and had few friends. Her parents divorced when she was in high school, and that crack in her world seemed to deepen the sense of not belonging. She briefly tried college and even considered becoming a nun at one point, but her path took a turn far darker than anyone could have imagined. In 1967, at age 19, she met Charles Manson, a man who saw her insecurities not as weaknesses, but as doorways to control. He told her she was beautiful, that she mattered, that she belonged. It was the first time anyone had said those things in a way that felt real. She was pulled in like a moth to flame. Before long, she dropped everything and followed him to San Francisco, and then to the now infamous Spawn Ranch near Los Angeles. There, Patricia became Katie, her cult name. Manson's words became her gospel. His philosophies, twisted and apocalyptic, painted a world on the edge of collapse. He preached of a coming race war, helter-skelter, and convinced his followers that they were the chosen ones to survive and guide the new order. On the night of August 8, 1969, Patricia Krenwinkel drove with Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, and Linda Kasabian to 1005 Occhiello Drive, the home of actress Sharon Tate and her husband, director Roman Polanski. Tate was 8.5 months pregnant. Her guests that night included hairstylist Jay Sebring, coffee heiress Abigail Folger, and Polish writer Wojciech Frykowski. What happened next was a horror scene beyond imagining. Patricia chased down Abigail Folger as she tried to escape, tackled her on the lawn, and stabbed her 28 times. Inside the house, the group slaughtered the others with cold precision. Sharon Tate, begging for the life of her unborn baby, was stabbed 16 times. And it didn't end there. The following night, Krenwinkel participated again, this time in the murders of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, wealthy grocers from Los Angeles. She carved the word war into Leno's stomach and smeared messages on the walls in the couple's blood. When the police eventually caught up with the Manson family, it was a trail of blood and madness that shocked the world. Krenwinkel was arrested in Alabama, where she had fled to live with relatives. In 1971, after a sensational trial filled with bizarre outbursts, eerie singing, and cult-like devotion to Manson, she was convicted of 7 counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy. The original sentence was death, but in 1972, California briefly abolished the death penalty, and her sentence was automatically commuted to life imprisonment. After the chaos of the courtroom faded and the cult disbanded in prison uniforms, Patricia Krenwinkel began the slow, silent descent into life behind bars. No longer shielded by Charles Manson's influence or surrounded by other loyal family members, she was left to sit alone with what she had done, and the silence of prison has a way of forcing reflection. At the California Institution for Women, Krenwinkel has lived more years in prison than she did in the outside world. Decades have passed, presidents have come and gone, policies have shifted, but her inmate number remains the same. She has no children, no family waiting for her release. The world she left in 1969 no longer exists. In its place is a small, controlled existence within concrete walls. Over the years, Patricia has become something of a paradox. To some inside the prison, she's soft-spoken, even maternal. She tutors fellow inmates, has written apologies, and has participated in various rehabilitation programs. Some guards have said she is a model prisoner. She co-founded support groups for incarcerated women and became involved in helping others process grief and guilt. But none of that has erased her past. Each time she comes up for parole, and there have been over a dozen hearings, the memories of those bloody nights are dragged back into the light. The victims' families attend, often in tears, reminding the board that no act of rehabilitation can bring back the 7 lives she helped take. Each hearing ends the same way: parole denied. Krenwinkel has claimed that Manson manipulated her, that she was brainwashed. She has called her actions unspeakable and said she no longer recognizes the person she was. But not everyone believes the change is real or enough. In 2017, for the first time, a parole board recommended her release. They cited her age, her model behavior, and her insight into her crimes. But the decision ignited public outrage. California's governor overturned the recommendation, stating that she still posed an unreasonable danger to society. The weight of her past was simply too heavy. And so she remains. Now in her 70s, Patricia Krenwinkel walks slowly through the prison yard, her long hair gone gray. She writes, reads, and waits. She's no longer the frightened teenager who met Charles Manson, nor the cold-blooded follower who carved messages into walls. But she is, and always will be, the woman who helped carry out one of the most horrific murder sprees in American history. As of now, Patricia Krenwinkel is still serving her life sentence without the possibility of parole at the California Institution for Women. And barring any extraordinary decision, she will die behind those walls except by some miracle. She receives pardon. 2. Kristen Gilbert, often referred to as the Angel of Death. At first glance, Kristen Gilbert didn't seem like someone you'd fear. She was a registered nurse at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northampton, Massachusetts. Young, blonde, and clean-cut. A mother, a military wife. Colleagues said she was intelligent, ambitious, even charming. She worked hard, often volunteered for night shifts, and had a knack for handling emergencies. But beneath that calm, capable exterior, something was deeply wrong. And in a hospital wing meant to preserve life, Kristen Gilbert became a force of death. The pattern was subtle at first. The night shift would start quietly. Then, often within the hour, a patient would code his heart, suddenly stopping. Gilbert would be first to respond, leaping into action, barking orders, pressing chest compressions, demanding epinephrine. Sometimes she saved them, sometimes she didn't. But what her co-workers eventually noticed was chilling. The number of cardiac arrests skyrocketed when Kristen was on duty and dropped dramatically when she wasn't. Veterans in relatively stable condition, recovering from pneumonia, post-surgery, or just beginning to walk again, were suddenly dying of unexplained heart failure. It made no sense. Epinephrine was a common factor. Investigators would later learn that Gilbert had been injecting massive doses of it into her patients' 4 lines, sending their hearts into chaos, just so she could be the hero who brought them back. Except she didn't always bring them back. One of the first who grew suspicious was fellow nurse Danielle Boudreau. She started keeping track, writing down patient codes, dates, and who was on shift. The data was impossible to ignore. Deaths doubled when Gilbert was working. And in a hospital that prided itself on meticulous records, boxes of epinephrine began disappearing with no explanation. By 1996, the situation was critical. Nurses were afraid to leave her alone with patients. One even called in sick just to avoid working with her. An anonymous report finally triggered an internal investigation, and Kristen, cool and composed as ever, resigned before they could formally suspend her. But she wasn't done. That same year, after learning she was under scrutiny, Gilbert called in a bomb threat to the hospital. Her attempt to distract investigators only deepened their resolve. The FBI stepped in. Exhumations were ordered. The bodies of veterans men who had served their country were dug up and tested for traces of drugs they were never prescribed. The results confirmed their fears. Kristen Gilbert had not just broken her oath. She had weaponized it. At trial, prosecutors called her the Angel of Death. They showed how she had methodically chosen her victims, injected them, and then tried to revive them in a twisted bid for attention and possibly to impress a hospital security guard she was rumored to be having an affair with. Family members of the deceased sat in shock as autopsy after autopsy was read aloud. Men who should have gone home to their wives and children had become pawns in Gilbert's dark game. In 2001, she was convicted of 4 murders and 2 attempted murders. But investigators believe the real numbers are far beyond 300. But these can't be proven, as only suspicions are being made. Kristen Gilbert was sentenced to multiple life terms without the possibility of parole. She is currently incarcerated at the Federal Medical Center, Carswell in Fort Worth, Texas, a prison hospital for female inmates with severe mental or medical needs. She doesn't speak to the media. She has never expressed public remorse. And the families she left behind still live with questions that may never be fully answered. Kristen Gilbert's story remains one of the most haunting betrayals of trust in American medical history. A nurse who chose not to heal, but to harm. And she is still serving her time alive, locked away, and remembered not as a caregiver, but as a killer. 3. Larissa Schuster. You don't expect a scientist, a woman in a lab coat, looking into beakers and microscopes, to become the architect of a brutal, premeditated murder. But Larissa Schuster wasn't just any scientist. She was a trained biochemist. A woman who understood the molecular breakdown of the human body. And in 2003, she used that knowledge in a way no one could have imagined. She would come to be known as the Acid Lady. Larissa Schuster and her husband, Timothy, had what appeared to be a stable life in Clovis, California. 2 children. A quiet home, a future. But underneath the surface, their marriage was dissolving emotionally long before it dissolved physically. Friends said Larissa was domineering, controlling. Timothy, a soft-spoken medical technician, had become increasingly withdrawn, even afraid. He told co-workers that his wife had threatened to ruin him financially and take their son away if he left her. And when he finally filed for divorce and moved out of the house, something in Larissa snapped. This wasn't just a bitter separation. Larissa wasn't interested in freedom. She wanted revenge, and she wasn't going to fight for custody or property. She was going to remove him completely, if you know what that means. In the weeks leading up to Timothy's murder, Larissa began plotting with her lab assistant, a young man named James Fagan. He was impressionable, barely in his 20s, and seemed to do whatever Larissa asked. Whether it was loyalty, infatuation, or fear, he agreed to help her. What they planned together was nothing short of horrifying. On July 10, 2003, Timothy Schuster was reported missing. He hadn't shown up for work. He wasn't answering his phone. His car was still parked outside his apartment. But the apartment itself had been broken into, furniture overturned, blood on the floor. No sign of a struggle outside, just inside. And no sign of Timothy. That was enough to raise an alarm and get the police to work. At first, investigators didn't have a body, only silence, until they traced the last people to see him alive. The investigation finally got to Larissa. She denied everything. She was calm, smug, even. But her story didn't add up, so they deepened investigation on her and even searched her house. When police searched the storage unit she had rented under a fake name, they found something chilling. Inside was a blue 55-gallon drum. It was sealed shut, and it reeked. When hazmat teams opened it, they found Timothy's partially dissolved body, submerged in a vat of hydrochloric acid. He had been sedated, beaten, possibly still alive when he was placed in the barrel. The acid had eaten away at his flesh and bones, breaking him down inch by inch. It was the kind of method only someone with scientific knowledge could execute. A methodical, calculated way to erase a person from existence. The discovery stunned even seasoned detectives. And as the forensic evidence mounted, so did Larissa's calm demeanor crack. Cell phone records showed she was the owner and had been at the storage unit. Lab purchases showed she had obtained the acid weeks in advance. James Fagan, the assistant, eventually turned on her, admitting that he had helped kidnap Timothy, but claimed Larissa had delivered the fatal dose and orchestrated the plan entirely. At her trial in 2008, prosecutors painted Larissa as cold-blooded, not angry, not emotional, calculated. She had used her education and resources not to advance science, but to destroy a human being. The courtroom listened in horror as experts described how long it takes for hydrochloric acid to dissolve flesh. How painful it would have been. How intentional the entire plan had been. But interestingly, she showed little emotion during testimony. No tears, no apology. Even as Timothy's sister broke down on the stand, begging the court to remember him not as a victim, but as a father, a brother, a kind soul. The jury found Larissa Schuster guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She is currently incarcerated at Central California Women's Facility, the largest women's prison in the United States. Behind bars, Larissa remains largely silent. You'd think this is time for her to think over her actions and apologize, but she hasn't. She gives no interviews. She has not issued a public apology. Inmate records list her as inmate #X231159. But to those who remember her case, she always called the Acid Lady a woman who weaponized her science degree to commit one of the most grotesque murders in California history. Her story is a warning that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't loud. They're the ones in lab coats. The ones who know exactly how to make a body disappear. 4. Natasha Cornett. She was barely 18. Thin, pale, dark eyeliner carved deep circles around her eyes. To strangers, Natasha Cornett looked like a troubled teenager. Maybe even just misunderstood. But in the spring of 1997, she would become the face of one of the most senseless and brutal crimes Kentucky had ever seen. Her name became inseparable from tragedy. And her victims were a family who never saw it coming. Natasha was born in 1979 in the rural town of Pikeville, Kentucky. Her childhood was anything but stable. Raised by a single mother, she never knew her father. Money was scarce. Home was turbulent. And from a young age, Natasha felt like an outsider, rejected by her peers, misunderstood by adults, and consumed by a deep anger that no one seemed to notice. By the time she was 14, she had dropped out of school. She wore black, listened to Marilyn Manson, carved pentagrams into notebooks. She began calling herself a Wiccan, a vampire. Not out of true belief, but because it made her feel powerful, seen, feared. At the time, adults dismissed her as just another rebel teen. No one imagined where that rebellion would lead. She drifted through Kentucky, collecting other lost kids like her, outcasts, misfits. 6 of them, including Natasha, eventually banded together in early 1997. They didn't have a clear plan, just a shared desire to escape their lives and go somewhere anywhere else. They stole a car, packed their belongings, and started driving south, headed for New Orleans, for freedom, for reinvention. But on April 6, 1997, their path crossed with the Lillelid family. Vidar, a soft-spoken man originally from Norway. His wife, Delphina. Their 2 young children, 6-year-old Tabitha and 2-year-old Peter. They were Jehovah's Witnesses, stopping at a rest area off I-81 in Greenville, Tennessee, handing out religious pamphlets. They saw the group of teenagers and approached them with kindness. It was a fatal mistake. The group, led by Natasha and her closest friend Karen Howell, pretended to listen. They saw an opportunity, a clean minivan, a trusting family. In minutes, the teens pulled guns. They forced the Lillelids into their own van. And what followed was a 30-mile journey into horror. They drove the family into the woods, near a remote spot by the Kentucky border. There, they ordered them out of the van, made them meal. Then the bullets came. Vidar was shot, his body left draped over a ditch. Delphina too. Tabitha was executed beside them. And Peter, just 2 years old, was shot twice in the head. Somehow he survived, but with permanent, devastating injuries. The killers took the family's van, abandoned their old car, and fled the scene. It didn't take long for law enforcement to catch up. The group was stopped days later at the Mexican border, in the stolen van, covered in the blood of the family they'd murdered. They were arrested without resistance. And one by one, their stories began to unravel. Natasha claimed she never pulled the trigger. She said she was just along for the ride. But prosecutors didn't buy it. They painted her as the ringleader, the influence, the manipulator, a teenager with a dangerous charisma and a hunger for chaos. She sat in court dressed in black, showing little emotion. No remorse, no explanation. When asked about the satanic symbols in her journal, she smirked. To the jury, it was all they needed to see. All 6 defendants were offered plea deals to avoid the death penalty. Natasha Cornett was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. She was only 18. Today, she is incarcerated at the Bledsoe County Correctional Complex in Tennessee. Now in her mid-40s, Natasha has faded from the headlines, but her presence still haunts prison walls. Other inmates reportedly fear her. Not because of physical violence, but because of her psychological power, her ability to manipulate, to draw people in. She's been written up multiple times for prison violations. And though she occasionally pens letters to outsiders, she's never apologized publicly for the Lillelid murders. Natasha Cornett wasn't born a killer. But in the absence of love, structure, or accountability, she became one. And in one moment of shared cruelty, a teenage runaway became a symbol of darkness in rural America. 5. Betty Broderick. She was beautiful, educated, charming. A mother of 4, a former medical wife. She had the life many women envied. Trips to Europe, private school kids, cocktail parties in the suburbs of San Diego. But behind the pearls and polished smiles was a slow-burning anger. And on a quiet November morning in 1989, that anger exploded. This is the story of Betty Broderick. Betty was born Elizabeth Ann Bisceglia in 1947 in a strict Roman Catholic family in Bronxville, New York. She was the third of 6 children, raised with one clear message: marry well, support your husband, and put family first. And that's exactly what she tried to do. She met Dan Broderick at a party in college. He was ambitious, bright, and studying to be a doctor, later switching to law. Betty, in love and dutiful, married him young and followed him through years of school, supporting their growing family while he built a career. They had 4 children and moved into a beautiful home in Loyola, California. Dan eventually became a powerful medical malpractice attorney, rich, well-connected, and respected. Betty, however, felt herself disappearing. She sacrificed her 20s and 30s to build his dream, only to feel cast aside when he made it. To make matters worse, there was a new person in the picture, Linda Kokina, his much younger assistant. By the mid-1980s, Betty's world was falling apart. Dan filed for divorce. He moved out, took the kids, then married Linda and bought a new home with her, lavish, sunny, and pristine. Betty, meanwhile, was spiraling. She left angry voicemails, smashed mirrors, rammed her car into Dan's front door. Her anger was legendary, so were her courtroom outbursts. But people who knew her said this wasn't just rage, it was pain. She felt betrayed by Dan, the court system, even society. The man she'd built her life around had discarded her and seemed to be winning. For years, she tried to fight back legally. She demanded more alimony, more custody, more justice, but none of it brought her peace. Then, on November 5, 1989, Betty used the key she had stolen to sneak into Dan and Linda's home at 5 a.m. She walked up to their bedroom and fired 5 shots from a .38 caliber revolver. 2 bullets hit Linda, 1 hit Dan in the chest. Neither of them survived. Betty didn't run. She called her daughter later that morning and confessed. "I did it," she said. "I killed Dad." Her trial became a media circus. Was she a cold-blooded murderer or a woman pushed past her limits? The first jury couldn't decide. But during the second trial, Betty was found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 32 years to life. Today, Betty Broderick is serving her sentence at the California Institution for Women. She's in her late 70s. Still articulate, still defiant. She's been denied parole multiple times for refusing to show remorse. To this day, she claims she was the true victim. "I was a good wife," she said. "I was loyal, I believed in the rules." But those who knew Dan and Linda say otherwise. They say Betty crossed a line no heartbreak can justify. She didn't just want justice, she wanted control. And when she couldn't have it, she used a gun. The story of Betty Broderick forces us to ask, how far can resentment go before it turns fatal? How much pain can someone carry before it poisons everything?